In this unit, we're going to be focusing on reading comprehension, and we're going to be looking at a series of stories called the Just So stories. In today's session, we're going to be trying to answer the question of how can I demonstrate my understanding of a text? Now, as I said, in this unit, we're going to be looking at the Just So stories, and these are written by someone called Rudyard Kipling. And I just want us to pause for a moment and think about that name. Does it sound familiar to you? Do you know anything about this person? So pause the video, have a little think about what you know, and then come and join me when you're ready to share your ideas. Now, firstly, we need to make sure we're not getting our Kiplings mixed up. We're not talking about Mr. Kipling, the maker of exceedingly good cakes. Instead, we're looking at Rudyard Kipling, who was a short story writer, a novelist and a poet, and he was born over 150 years ago. He's best known for being the author of The Jungle Book in 1894, the famous poem If in 1910, and also a collection of short stories that we are going to be looking at in this unit. Have you come across any of these writings by Rudyard Kipling? The Jungle Book, for example, has been made into a film many times, and the poem If gets used an enormous amount of times in sort of films and TV. And of course, the stories we're looking at today were one of my favourites as a child. Maybe you've read them before. Rudyard Kipling was born in 1865 in a city called Bombay in India, which is now known as Mumbai. He was educated in England, but returned to India in 1882 at the age of 16. A decade later, Kipling married Caroline Balestier and went to live in America. There, they had their first daughter, Josephine, who was known as Effie. And Kipling would often make up stories to tell his daughter at bedtime. And he tells us that in the evening there were stories meant to put Effie to sleep, and you were not allowed to alter those by one single little word. They had to be told just so, or Effie would wake up and put back the missing sentence. He told Effie 3 stories: the whale tale, the camel tale, and the rhinoceros tale. And in 1902, these stories, along with some others, were published together in a book with the title The Just So Stories. Many of these stories are origin tales, and they give fantastical explanations for how some animals develop their distinctive features. And we can see on the screen some of the titles for the stories that Rudyard Kipling wrote. But why do you think he chose the title The Just So Stories for this collection? We look at the titles: how the leopard got his spots, how the camel got his hump, how the rhinoceros got his skin, and how the whale got his throat. Why do you think that these were called Just So stories, not something else? Think about Effie, the person who he told these stories to as a little girl. Is there any clue about any of the information that Rudyard Kipling has told us? Now, today we're going to be reading the very first short story from this book, How the Whale Got His Throat. And just to warn you, this story was written over 100 years ago, and our language, English, has developed and changed and evolved quite a bit since that time. So we're going to be exposed to some language that may sound strange and unfamiliar. So as we're listening to the story and as we're reading the story, I want you to be thinking about the different strategies we can use to try and help ourselves find out the meaning of these unfamiliar words. You'll be able to see the text on the screen as well as hearing me read it. But if you'd prefer to have your own text in front of you, on the website you'll find a downloaded version, and you can print that off or keep it on screen, and you can read that along with me as well. So with no further ado, let's begin our first short story from the Just So stories. How the Whale Got His Throat. In the sea, once upon a time, oh my best beloved, there was a whale, and he ate fishes. He ate the starfish and the garfish, and the crab and the dab, and the plaice and the dace, and the skate and his mate, and the mackerel and the pickerel, and the really truly twirly whirly eel. All the fishes he could find in all the sea he ate with his mouth so, till at last there was only one small fish left in all the sea, and he was a small 'stute fish, and he swam a little behind the whale's right ear so as to be out of harm's way. Then the whale stood up on his tail and said, "I'm hungry." And the 'Stute Fish said, in a small, 'stute voice, "Noble and generous cetacean, have you ever tasted man?" "No," said the whale. "What is it like?" "Nice," said the small 'Stute Fish. "Nice but nubbly." "Then fetch me some," said the whale, and he made the sea froth up with his tail. Before we move on, let's think about that section of the story we've just read. Why was there only one fish left in the sea? What happened to the others? And what was it that the whale had never eaten? Pause for a moment, think about those questions, and come and join me when you're ready to move on with the story. "One at a time is enough," said the 'Stute Fish. "If you swim to latitude 50 north, longitude 40 west, that is magic, you will find sitting on a raft in the middle of the sea with nothing on but a pair of blue canvas breeches and a pair of suspenders. You must not forget the suspenders, best beloved, and a jackknife, one shipwrecked mariner, who, it is only fair to tell you, is a man of infinite resource and sagacity." So the whale swam and swam to latitude 50 north, longitude 40 west, as fast as he could swim, and on a raft in the middle of the sea, with nothing to wear except a pair of blue canvas breeches, a pair of suspenders, you must be particularly remember the suspenders, best beloved, and a jackknife, he found one single solitary shipwrecked mariner, trailing his toe in the water. He had his mummy's leave to paddle, or else he would never have done it, because he was a man of infinite resource and sagacity. Now, before we move on, I think it's important to highlight some words. We're told to not forget the suspenders, and suspenders are elastic straps that are attached to trousers at the waist and hooked over the shoulders. Another word for these could be braces. Sagacity is another word for wisdom, intelligence, or insight. So we're looking at a mariner who's very wise. Then the whale opened his mouth back and back and back till it nearly touched his tail, and he swallowed the shipwrecked mariner, and the raft he was sitting on, and his blue canvas breeches, and the suspenders, which you must not forget, and the jackknife. He swallowed them all down into his warm, dark inside cupboard, and then he smacked his lips and turned round 3 times on his tail. But as soon as the mariner, who was a man of infinite resource and sagacity, found himself truly inside the whale's warm, dark inside cupboards, he stumped and he jumped and he thumped and he bumped and he pranced and he danced and he banged and he clanged and he hit and he bit and he leaped and he creeped and he prowled and he howled and he hopped and he dropped and he cried and he sighed and he crawled and he bawled and he stepped and he leapt and he danced hornpipes where he shouldn't. And the whale felt most unhappy indeed. Why do you think the whale was most unhappy? What do you think had happened to make the whale feel this way? Have a little pause, have a little think. Come and join me when you're ready. So he said to the 'Stute Fish, "This man is very nubbly, and besides he makes me hiccough. What shall I do?" "Tell him to come out," said the 'Stute Fish. So the whale called down his own throat to the shipwrecked mariner. "Come out and behave yourself. I've got the hiccoughs." "Nay, nay," said the mariner, "not so, but far otherwise. Take me to my natal shore and the white cliffs of Albion, and I'll think about it." And he began to dance more than ever. "You'd better take him home," said the 'Stute Fish to the whale. "I ought to have warned you, but he is a man of infinite resource and sagacity." So let's have a little recap of what's happened so far and what's going to go on. What did the whale want the mariner to do? And what did the mariner want the whale to do? Pause again for a few moments, have a little think, come and join me when you're ready to move on with the story. So the whale swam and swam and swam with both flippers in his tail as hard as he could for the hiccoughs, and at last he saw the mariner's natal shore and the white cliffs of Albion, and he rushed halfway up the beach and opened his mouth wide and wide and wide and said, "Change here for Winchester, Ashulet, Nashia, Keene, and stations on the Fitchburg Road." And just as he said Fitch, the mariner walked out of his mouth. But while the whale had been swimming. The mariner, who was indeed a person of infinite resource and sagacity, had taken his jackknife and cut up the raft into a little square grating, all running crisscross, and he had tied it firm with his suspenders. Now, you know why you were not to forget the suspenders. And he dragged that grating good and tight into the whale's throat. And there it stuck. Then he recited the following sloka, which, as you have not heard it, I will now proceed to relate. By means of grating, I have stopped your eating. So what did the mariner make with his raft and suspenders? And what do you think this is going to stop the whale from doing? Have a little pause, have a little think. Share your ideas and come and join me when you're ready. For the mariner, he was also a Hibernian, and he stepped out on the shingle and went home to his mother, who had given him leave to trail his toes in the water, and he married and lived happily ever afterwards. So did the whale. But from that day on, the grating in his throat, which he could neither cough up nor swallow down, prevented him eating anything except very, very small fish, and that is the reason why whales nowadays never eat men, or boys, or little girls. The small 'stute fish went and hid himself in the mud under the door-sills of the equator. He was afraid that the whale might be angry with him. The sailor took the jackknife home. He was wearing the blue canvas breeches when he walked out on the shingle. The suspenders were left behind, you see, to tie the grating with. And that is the end of that tale. But before we do leave this short story by Rudyard Kipling, why might the whale be angry with the 'stute fish? Have a little pause, think about this, come and join me with your answer. So thinking back over our story of how the whale got his throat, we can see an illustration. Which part of the stories do you think each section is depicting? You can see on the top section, we've got our mariner dipping his toes into the water and the whale coming up. When we look at the bottom picture, we can see our mariner jumping up and down in the insides of the whale. So we can see the two different parts of the story that these illustrations are showing us. So that was our first visit to the Just So stories. What did you think of the story? Did you enjoy it? Did you find any parts difficult to understand? Why do you think that? Share your thoughts and opinions on this with the people around you, and then come and join me to hear your explanation about what your activity is going to be. So with the activity that's been set, it's your turn to show your understanding of this text. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go back and have a look at the story of how a whale got his throat. And I want you, along with the text and the glossary which you'll find on the website, that sheet which has definitions and explanations of these new and unfamiliar words we might have come across, I want you to answer these questions. And once you've answered these questions, you'll find the answers on the website as well. So you'll be able to double check that you're doing this completely and making sure that you're accurate with your answers. But take your time. Make sure you read these questions clearly. Make sure you take your time to understand them, to allow yourself the best opportunity to answer them in full. If you manage to complete that activity, so for your extension, you can complete my word detectives, where you're going to find out about these words highlighted in blue. You're going to be able to look back at the story sheet to remind yourself about what's been going on, what these words mean. And I want you to define it. I want you to explain in your own words what each one of these words means. And then what I'd like you to do is create a synonym that could be used in its place. It's a little bit easier to understand. And I want you to rewrite that sentence using your synonym. And just before you race off to do all that independent activity, to really show off how great your understanding of the text is, I'm going to leave you with this final question. Don't bite off more than you can chew. This is a saying you've probably heard many times before. But what do you think it actually means? And how could it relate to our tale? Have a little think about that and come back to our next session with the answer. I look forward to seeing what your explanations is. Good luck with your work today,